You're listening to
They're going to call it a hard foul. They're going to call it a hard
foul. Welcome, everyone, to They're Going to Call It a Hard Foul, brought to you by the Fan First Network. As always, I'm here with my brother Mike, and tonight, following the Celtics' victory last night, we have a special guest from WEEI, Justin Turpin. Justin, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Excited to get in. Justin, you're a co-host of the Slam podcast, and I listened to you guys. I thought you got great breakdown after the trade deadline, value in the trades, and I definitely want to talk to you about how that's going to impact the Celtics going forward and what raises the level of another team's opportunity to beat them, whatnot. But I just love to hear from you, just off the top, your thoughts on the first half of the season.
Yeah, I think it's gone the way people should have expected it to, right? I think going into the season, and this was natural, there were these high expectations, and there should still be high expectations, but I think people were expecting them to just coast through the season just like they did last year and have none of these obstacles. That's not the reality when you're the reigning champions. And you've heard other champs talk about it when they were in Golden State a couple weeks ago. Steph Curry and Steve Kerr talked about it. And when Steve Kerr especially says that, I think that's some wisdom that you need to listen to, right? He did it as a player with Michael Jordan and did it as a coach with Steph Curry. So when he talks and he's discussing these experiences, I think people should listen. So I think it's gone the way people should have expected. I think the lull was a little bit longer than we would have hoped over across an 8-week span, but they're heading into the All-Star break high, and I think when they come back, they'll be ready to go.
Yeah, no, I think it's been about the same, but I think the one difference, and Justin, maybe you disagree, is they do seem bored at times, against certain teams. Like there was a clear difference in level of play when they play, let's say, Dallas or even the 76ers game where they had that great comeback. But for the most part, they kind of sleptwalked through that whole thing. Then as compared to Cleveland and the Knicks, where it felt like they could do whatever they wanted offensively. And obviously the defensive intensity was ratcheted up even more.
100%. And I think that's why people are more annoyed with the way they're playing, right? Because if you look at even the last week when they play New York, they go in there and Jason Tatum dominates that game. They had control the entire time. You look at the Cleveland game, again, they ratcheted it up and they were ready to go. When they want to win and they want to return to that dominant form that people expect, they can do it. And I think that's what people get annoyed with, because I think people are a little bit worried about the idea of them just flipping a switch, and they believe that that's a dangerous place to live. And I do agree with that. I think, you can't just flip a switch come postseason, but these guys still have the whole post All-Star half of the season to really get this going. So they've proven that they can just turn it up, and as annoying it as it is, they've earned that luxury now, and we can stop living and dying by every loss because they've shown they really can just turn it up.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I was concerned with the turning it on and turning it off. And I'm less now because my concern was, are they going to pick up bad habits from this?
Right.
And I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing bad habits when they play teams, I guess, how do I put it, that they respect, maybe? Like they probably would have played hard against Dallas if Anthony Davis wasn't hurt, right? I feel like they were in the locker room and they found out he was hurt and they were like, okay, we don't have to show up tonight. We might still win because we're so freaking talented. So I understand why people get frustrated, but I also think there's been a lot of evidence this year against playoff teams that they show up and they're ready to go. Maybe OKC the second half was one that it was a little concerning because they only scored, I think, 30 points for an entire half. But outside of that, they've really been locked in against these good teams. And quite honestly, even in the game they lost to Cleveland, I feel like Boston was the best team in all 3 games.
Yeah, so 25 fourth quarter points for Mitchell, right? They should. It took that to beat them.
Yeah, that's right. And Donovan Mitchell, he has our number. But I feel like there's some defensive deficiencies in Cleveland. They have a tough time matching up with us. And when Boston's really locked in, we're attacking Darius Garland on offense and on the defensive end. When they're locked in, I mean, they make it really difficult for anybody. That's why I still feel really good about their chances to repeat. And I'll leave it there. And Jim, if you have more questions, I'll give it to you.
No. So I see like a couple different, and I know I'm nitpicking, grasping at straws, but I think you can tell immediately early in games whether they're engaged or not. You look at their hustle stats, turnovers. Are they good but ball denial, and are they ball pressure, up in guys, and usually when the first quarter ends and they haven't caused any turnovers, you know what type of game you're going to be in for. They may score a lot, but you can almost tell on the other end. My bigger concern, though, Justin, I'd love to hear from you, is just it's night and day between last year and this year with their on-off minutes with Jason Tatum.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because they went through an 8-week stretch where nobody was making shots. So that doesn't help. Like, he's obviously your number one scorer, and Jaylen Brown's obviously struggled a little bit shooting the ball. And I think part of that is because he's been in and out of the rotation and out of the lineup with injuries. And it's been a problem really more so earlier in the year was a bigger problem where Drew Holiday's been in and out. Jalen's been in and out. Kristaps was in and out. Sam Hauser. So guys aren't finding their rhythm because they keep coming in and out of the lineup. And then when Tatum's off the floor, he's the one that initiates the offense more so now than ever. And I think ever since the finals, there's a newfound appreciation for what Tatum does on the offensive side. It's not about just scoring with him, right? He uses his gravity, and we saw it the entire NBA finals on the biggest stage. And I think that's when people realized it goes way more than just his scoring. So it's a little bit, the offense is completely different without Jason on the floor. And then when guys aren't making their shots, it's tough to have good offense. So now we're starting to see that go up a little bit because guys are starting to find their rhythm again. And a perfect example of that is Derek White. Like, when Derek White's playing well and he's shooting well, the Celtics are going to win and they're going to play well. So they need other guys to kind of pitch in. And Jason wasn't exempt from that either. I mean, he also had his struggles throughout that stretch. So I think a lot of those numbers are really kind of hindered by the stretch that we saw over a course of 8 weeks. But now they're starting to turn it up a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good point about Derek White, especially he's the fourth quarter guy. I feel like when Tatum's not in the game, like, I want the ball in his hands, and he was off for a pretty good stretch there. And you brought up Sam Hauser. I feel like when Sam Hauser's hitting threes, the Celtics are like impossible to beat because he just brings this other element, and Tatum's actively looking for him. He spreads the floor for Tatum and Brown, and suddenly he started to hit his shots again. And Al Horford started to hit his shots again. And here we are. Would they win 7 or 8 or 8 or 9? Something like
7
that.
or 8, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree.
And I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but if you look at the Sam Hauser numbers just based on how many threes he's making per game, their record just gets better and better. So when makes 2+ threes, 3+ threes, they just keep getting better. And I think also when Sam Hauser's getting shots, it's a good indication of how the offense is flowing. When he's getting shots, I think they're running good offense because obviously he does a lot to get open. And, he's a really underappreciated part of that. And I think he's a sneaky underrated part of this team because they don't really have another wing like him that can score. And when he's off, I mean, it's all that pressure is on Peyton Pritchard. And I mean, Al Horford's just starting to find it a little bit, but even last year when he came off the bench, he's not the scorer. And granted, he's not known for being a scorer, but he can score when he needs to. And that just hasn't been the case off the bench. So Sam's really important. And I like that you mentioned that 3-point stat because if you look, it's really interesting. It's the more threes he makes, the more success they have.
And the inclusion of Torrey Craig gives him a little bit more depth at that position, too. Right. And a little bit better defender. Probably not quite the shooter that Sam is. Certainly not a move shooter like Sam Hauser is, but gives him a different element that maybe, they didn't have, an extra wing body. Yeah. The starting five, since KP's come back, it feels like, to me anyways, it feels like it's just been one game where they've been locked in as a unit, and that was that Cleveland game. Do you have any concerns about them recovering or getting back to where they were last year, or you just think it's a competition thing, maybe them playing down to competition or lack of reps or something like that?
I think you said it earlier. I think they're just bored. At the beginning, it was the lack of reps and it was the lack of minutes, and teams that the Celtics were the easiest team to plan for this year because you had over 100 games on tape of the same exact team. Yeah. The top 9 was set. Like they added Baylor Shireman in the mix, but these guys weren't going to play. Yep. So all this film was on the team, and they've had all summer to game plan towards this team. And so they're getting defended differently. And when Kristaps isn't on the floor, it's hard to really adjust to that. So when guys were missing time at the beginning of the season, they were using 15 different starting lineups in the first month and a half of the season. It's tough to really get up for that, especially when teams are starting to figure you out a little bit, and you have to counter that. And they're starting to do that. But I think as part of that is they were the lack of reps, and Joe was really hard on that, where he made sure to always emphasize that these guys really weren't on the floor as much. Now I think they're acclimated, and we've seen that when they want to turn it up and when they're feeling up for it, they can do it. But other nights they're just disengaged, and they're like, let's just get to the playoffs already.
And this might be a small factor. I'm interested to know what you think, Justin. I feel like the refs are officiating Kristaps Porzingis different this year than last. I feel like he got a lot more foul calls on the post shots last year when people were bumping him, and this year he's not getting those calls. And the Celtics like to go that five high offense and getting him the ball down there. And I feel like at times it's kind of, he's played well, but it's taken away from the other guys' rhythms. And also at times he's getting fouled and like his shot will be off and the refs aren't calling it, which I think last year he was going to the line all the time. It was like you couldn't cover Kristaps Porzingis last year. It was like
he was near the top of among qualified players in the post of free throw attempts when they're working out of the post. So he did a great job with that last year. And the thing is too, it's just they're allowing more physicality. I think that's the big thing. There's just the refs are letting them play more, which is great, right? Like people, obviously the biggest talking point surrounding the league hasn't necessarily been the teams or the players involved. It's been the 3-point volume and how the game is soft now and how it's boring, but they're completely neglecting the fact that these guys are going to war down in the post night in and night out, and they are letting them play more physically. And that does change things. And that's also part of the starting 5, right? Like you mentioned, that Kristaps outlet, it's still there, but it took him a little bit to get going because he's adjusting to the physicality. So just the more time they have together, and that's another thing that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how the expectations of this team. Just because they spent all this time together last year, they have to just completely reacclimate. They had the whole summer off. Guys improved their games. Like, look at Peyton Pritchard. That's a guy now who has a new role on this team who was on the team last year, right? Things change. So that's part of that is the expectations. I think that's important where they're starting to figure it out. And people thought they would just click and continuity was supposed to be their biggest thing going into the season. But there was also growing pains naturally. There's growing pains with every season, whether you bring a whole new team or the same exact team, it's going to happen because no season's the same.
Yeah, Jim, I just want to say one more thing and I'll hand it back over to you. You know, you mentioned the physicality, and I think whatever it was 4 years ago when they traded Daniel Tice for Luke Cornett, whenever that was at the trade deadline, if you told me that the game changing to allow more physicality would actually help Luke Cornett as a player, I would have laughed in your face. And he's like really worked on his body. You see it. And like, I think he like flourishes in this physical kind of game. And he's playing so well this year because of that.
I mean, he has to be one of the best value contracts in the league.
Absolutely.
I mean, what this guy brings on a
night in, that's what he needs to do.
Seriously. And I give him a lot of credit. Like, he deserves it. Like, this guy took less to be here. And it's never going to be flashy in the box score. Some nights it is, and then he'll start doing his goofy celebrations that everyone loves, but it's not necessarily going to show up on the stat sheet every night. But what he does for this team with how he screens, how he spaces the floor, his rim protection, again, it might not always count in cumulative stats, but he is so important to this team. Like, he's one of the smartest basketball players I've seen. It feels like he's always just in the right spot, making the right decisions, and it shows on the court, like just how they flow with him. The Luke Cornett minutes are some of the highest rated minutes they have this year, and that's not a coincidence. Like, he excels at his role, and if that's your third center, you feel pretty good. And I don't know what it is. I think people around the league don't really give him the credit because they see all these highlights and these goofy celebrations. They're just this big goofball, but he is a damn good basketball player, and he's really important to this team.
Yeah, Sean Morey gave Andre Drummond, 2 for 20 for a guy that hasn't adjusted and acclimated to the league in the past 5 years at all. So they really, why Luke Cornett gets the league minimum, which is just,
it's crazy.
He could have hurt the Celtics by paying Luke Cornett too. That was the wild part about the whole thing. Hey, so Jason Tatum, I remember this Peter King article from years back with Tom Brady talking about Brady saying, I have the answers to the test now. I go up to I know what's going on. And it feels like with Tatum, with all the junk defenses he has seen over the years, these different type of traps, late double teams, things like that, that he's processing the game at a similar level. And so I watch this and I think the team that obviously made the biggest move that impacted the Celtics had to be the Cavs with DeAndre Hunter.
Right.
Because they don't match up at all with this guy right now. And if you go to double against the Celtics, they're killing you. If you doubling Tatum right now, you almost have to in the playoffs have someone that can single coverage this guy, I would think. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
100%. And one thing that's really underappreciated about Joe Mazzulla is how he taught this team the importance of spacing. And when he talks about it post-game, it's not just coach talk. It's not just throwing words out there so people don't really listen because he's, you know what I mean? It's not trying to deflect questions. He genuinely values spacing so much and the importance of it. And every basketball player or coach knows the importance of spacing the floor. And Joe Mazzulla really drilled that in with them. And when you got a team like the Celtics, if you're spacing the floor correctly and they double Tatum, you have guys that are all career league average 3-point shooters or better wide open because you're showing 2 at Tatum, and they're always going to make the right play because all day at practice, these guys just go through different reads. And the whole idea of the Celtics offense is to create open shots and attack 2-on-1 advantages and get mismatches. It's all very calculated. And Joe Mazzulla obviously calls it that killer whale offense, and we see it work in action. But you're right. You can't double this team because they just have such great shooters all over the floor, especially in the postseason. Like, I know Al Horford has been up and down from 3 this year, but are you going to trust that guy to make threes in the playoffs? Absolutely. You saw what he did to Cleveland last year in Game 5. Like, you leave the thing is with this team, it's just so well constructed that they are all just built for the moment and they all rise their games at that. And they're all obviously hell of a basketball players too. Like, there's 6 all-stars. Like, all of them have made, or with the exception of Derek White, have made an all-star appearance at one point. Like, this team is really good. And when they're spacing the floor and doing things those little things that Michael overlooked, they're unstoppable. And that's why you can't double against them.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike. I think you want to jump in, but I just look at it as right. You nailed it exactly. Like, if you try go ahead.
Is Hunter a guy that can help Cleveland on that end, do you think? Or is he, I watched him not a ton in Atlanta on League Pass, but I don't really remember seeing him as a defensive liability. It looked like he could defend a little bit, but I think he's known more for his offense. Do you think that's a guy they can trust to be alone on Tatum in the playoffs?
I think they hope so. I think that's why they go out and get him. They sure hope that they can trust him alone, and he's a wing stopper. I mean, he's a great defender, and definitely, like you said, Jim, that was the biggest trade that affected the Celtics because that's directly in competition. I know their teams aren't necessarily looking around the league and looking at the Celtics. It's like, how do we get to that level? This one felt like it was, where they're looking at DeAndre Hunter and be like, this is the guy that we can get at the trade deadline that gives us the best chance to get through Boston. And Cleveland deserves that, right? They obviously, they're number 1 team in the East. They're having a hell of a season. They think they have a shot at the NBA Finals. So in order to get there, you have to go through Boston. So they see a guy like DeAndre Hunter, who's a wing stopper, who's a great defender in the middle of his prime, in his mid-20s. You go out and get him. So they hope they can put him on Tatum and Brown and have him kind of slow them down, but the numbers across his career against them aren't very pretty. Like, they've had their way against him. And that's the thing is, so what? You're going to put Hunter on Tatum, and then what are you going to do with Jalen? What are you going to do with Drew? Like, what are you going to do with everyone else? They just have so many different ways to hurt you. I keep going back to that Joe Mazzulla quote from last year when he compared it to the Into the Spider-Verse movie, when there's just a bunch of different Spider-Men. Like, this is that team. Like, he's 100% right. Like, there's just no right answer to slow this team down. Like, I could only imagine game planning against this squad, because it's tough.
Well, I'm listening to your podcast after the trade deadline. One of you guys brought up the point. It might have even been you, Justin. I don't recall, but that the one thing he does have now is he does have Allen and Mobley behind him defensively, whereas Atlanta, you kind of Chris Capella is what he is. You know, he's kind of lacked that support defensively that he's going to have now.
Right. And I also think he brings them a level of discipline on the defensive end, because they fell out of the top 20 in last month in defense. Yeah. And that's not a winning recipe for any team, especially with Cleveland, how well they're playing defense. That was kind of triggering their offense at the beginning of the year. So I think he brings them some discipline, and it does allow him to play a little bit more aggressive when you got guys like Allen and Mobley behind him. I mean, that team's really good. It's just, you said it at the beginning, it's just not a great matchup for Boston. And when you're looking at across the Eastern Conference, none of the teams are good matchups. I mean, they've trailed in 2 games against New York. They've trailed for 49 seconds. You know how ridiculous that is? Like, this team went out and gave 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges to compete with Boston, and you haven't even led for a minute in 2 games. Like, they have way too many pick and roll targets. I think the same with Cleveland. Like, the Celtics, when they want to attack Garland, they're going to do it. When they want to attack Mitchell, they're going to do it. It's just, I don't see any team that's complete enough defensively to slow down Boston across a 7-game series. Now, any team can beat them, right? Mm-hmm. All it takes is one of those bad weeks or whatever that we saw in December and into January. But I just, looking across the league, they have, if you just look at the matchups, they have the advantage over every team, with the exception of maybe the Oklahoma City.
Yeah, well, the Knicks made all those trades, but they brought in Karl Anthony Towns and just kicked the defense to the side, because the Celtics
it was so weird, right? Because Tom Thibodeau is such a hard-nosed defensive coach, and it was just a complete philosophy change for New York, bringing in Karl Anthony Towns. And look, they're a good team. Like, they're obviously third in the Eastern Conference. It's just the 2 teams above them are significantly better.
Yeah, it's like, I think Indiana is one of the teams that give the Celtics the most problems if we had a 7-game series, just because of the way they play.
I mean, the Celtics were a couple bounces away from being down 3-1 in that series last year.
They sure were. Yeah, they sure were.
Well, even the Cleveland game, the thing that really surprised me is Evan Mobley's been so effective against everybody this year. But first game against Porzingis, he was completely ineffective against the Celtics, to the point where he was benched in the 4th quarter. You know, he doesn't really have a face-up. It's better, but it's not a great face-up game right now. His shooting from 3 has got better, but he's not a high-volume guy. Most of his work is done down low, and he couldn't get anything going against KP, which was eye-opening to me.
And that's something I look at with the Celtics, too. The bigs haven't necessarily been their problem. Even look at Victor Wembanyama last night. Like, they did a great job containing him. It's been the quicker guards that get them. Tyrese Maxey, Trae Young, Mitchell, right? You just keep going down the list of all these guards that have gotten them. So it's been quick guards, and it's been guys that they're letting shoot, getting hot, and start knocking. Dylan Brooks, for example, start knocking down their shots. Like, the list of those goes on and on and on. Like Caleb Martin on Christmas, Joel Embiid did it on Christmas. It's like, that's been their biggest issues defensively.
That's kind of bad luck in some way.
That's bad luck. And I also think part of it too, though, is when you're letting guys shoot, and you guys have been around basketball, when you're letting guys shoot, when they get in that rhythm, it's sometimes hard to knock them out of that rhythm. So when you're letting a guy shoot and they knock down their first 3, they're letting it fly confidently. And some nights it's going to work and they're going to come down to earth. And then other nights you're going to have Dylan Brooks scoring 40 points and knocking down 10 threes and chirping at the fans every time he makes it. So it's a gamble. And across a 7-game series, do you really think Dylan Brooks, for example, is going to hit 10 threes a game? Like, no, it's not going to happen. So in the short term, I get why people are a little bit frustrated with it, because you're seeing like, come on, we got to adjust. We got to stop letting these guys take their shots. But the Celtics are really driven by the analytics, and they're going to stick by the numbers, and they've earned that right. It worked last year. They were 64-18, lost 3 games in the postseason, won an NBA Finals, and they finished top 5 in point differential. Whatever their strategy is, it clearly works, and they deserve a chance to run it back. And if you look at the advanced numbers now, they're kind of on pace with last year. And the thing is, it's like it doesn't feel like it because they had that long lull of inconsistency, and I think they're 4 games back of their pace from last year. They're on pace to win 58 games this year. That won the Eastern Conference by 8 games last season. 8 games.
Yeah, and I think part of it is they were so dominant after the All-Star break last year, so that recency bias of what we remember from last year was that second half. It's really what were you just I think Celtics fans deserve a little bit of room because they do have PTSD from Gabe Vincent and Caleb Martin doing that over the course of 7 games.
It's very true.
So, hey, Justin, I think what you guys done at WEEI on the basketball coverage front is really well appreciated, at least on our front.
Thank you so much.
I think, your competitor over at the flagship, it's more storyline based, and a lot of it is contrived, I think, at times, and they that leads to some really ugly calls, I think, from the call-in over on that station. I remember last year with Tatum, there was a lot of negative, just heat thrown his way that I thought was all pushed by the station originally. I think
they were taking calls for years about trading Jason Tatum to Washington for Roy Hachimura.
You know how ridiculous that sounds? Like, the guy has been to the Eastern Conference Finals pretty much every year. 5 of the 7 years before this year, 5 of 7 years he's been to the Eastern Conference Finals, and people are like, nope, it's not good enough. But then, you look at it historically, Jordan won his first title at 28. Kevin Durant was 28. Curry was 26. LeBron was 20. He's right on pace. And people just don't understand it because he had so much success in such a short period of time. And he did it with 3 different coaches.
That's right.
No, for sure. And what you guys have done, especially you and Megan and guys like Rich Keefe, it's really been appreciated. And on that front, you guys have seemed to have been out in front a lot on some of this ownership stuff that's really hasn't got really great coverage anywhere, and it's left a lot of us in the dark. I don't know if you have any more light to shine on what might be going on, and just your thoughts on the whole thing.
Yeah, the thing is with the ownership and the Celtics just in general, they keep everything really close to the vest. So the only person that we know is officially in the running is Steve Pagliuca, because he's the only one that explicitly said it, right? I don't think Jeffrey Lurie, that people are trying to kind of read between the lines of his words before the Super Bowl and think, well, he didn't really refute it. Well, he said he wasn't really interested in purchasing a sports team. So I'm going to go with he's being out. So the only one that we really know of is Steve Pagliuca. And I think the initial bids went in a week or 2 ago. So it's going to start to come out, especially as we get closer to this process. But the Celtics keep everything close to the vest. And I really do think they don't want this to be a distraction in any sense for the players, for the fans, for the people in the front office, for whoever it may be. Wyc Grousbeck wants this to be a really private sale process because he doesn't want it taking away from this team. Tell you what, around the front office and the ownership and coaching staff, everyone involved, they truly believe this team deserves the best. And obviously that stems after winning a championship last year, but this is a historically good team, and they don't want what they're doing overshadowed by an ownership process and uncertainty. Because once you start talking about the uncertainty, obviously there was conversations around the trade deadline. Oh, they might trade Drew Holiday. Oh, they might trade Jaylen Brown. Did people actually believe that? That was never going to happen. They weren't going to punt on a championship run here. It was always the clearest day, the only 2 players they were going to consider moving was Jaden Springer or Xavier Tillman. So when you see things like that, it's this is why we don't want this ownership stuff out. We don't want this all public. And everyone keeps going back to Fenway Sports Group, and it makes sense, right? They're already in the market. They've expressed interest in having an NBA team. But when you look at what FSG has done, especially with the Red Sox, off the field, right? They built around Fenway Park. They put the MGM Music Hall there. They put all these attractions around the park that they own, selling the experience. And a lot of people have a lot of qualms and gripes with that. And that's one thing, but that's their business model.
Yeah.
You can't do that here. But Can they do it in Vegas where they have their own stadium
Yeah.
and they have all this attractions that they can build off? So it never made sense for Fenway Sports Group either. So I think people just need to be patient. And as much as, everyone's been left in the dark, reporters included, about what's going on, I think people just have to be patient and just understand that there's a reason they're taking this so slow.
Yeah, Vegas is a little easier to do business too. You just got to grease a few county commissioners' palms, and you probably be okay there.
And you'll have your own stadium. Like that's the thing with FSG. You think John Henry and them are going to want to pay rent to the Jacobs family? Absolutely not.
Yeah, as soon as they get that Vegas team up, the first player they should trade for is Terry Rozier.
that'd be something. I wonder how much stuff of that would happen. Like I bet you there's already an NFL team there, a hockey team, and none of it's really there. The thing is,
you can do it anywhere now, so it doesn't really.
You can do it right off your phone. Like it's not like they're going to be walking out of the sports book with tickets. Like it is crazy though, just how. It was obviously going to happen eventually, but the fact that it's actually coming to light now, like we had the whole thing last year, obviously Terry Rozier, and it hits a little closer to home when you see a guy that you watched and wore the Celtics uniform and was one of their best players through a playoff run, and you see his name come up on it. It hits a little bit differently. So I think teams and leagues are always prepared for it, just because it's inevitable at this point.
Yeah, I remember Drew Bledsoe wearing his jersey at the Bucks series in that first round.
Yes.
With the whole thing with Eric Bledsoe was awesome. Justin, when me and Jimmy started this podcast during COVID, it was so we could hang out, and it kind of just kept going, and we have fun with it. When he told me you were coming on, I just started thinking back to like, oh my God, the guy from WEI. I was like, when I was a kid, like it was the Weena Wina line. It was, of course, we still do the Jimmy Fund Foundation, which is awesome. The work you guys do there. I just want to say, I don't know how much longer we're on. I wanted to make sure before I got off to just say it means a lot that you came on today. To me. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, guys. Thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
No, thank you. Any before we go, any prediction for the season? How this is going to end?
I wrote about this the other day at WEEI.com. I really do think that they're going to come out of the All-Star break ready to go. And they're going to look like this team that we saw going into the All-Star break, because they made it a point to hit the All-Star break playing some of their best basketball. Now coming back, they know it's, go have your vacation time now, get your rest in, because now we got to start building those good habits. We can't keep messing around. We got to build the foundation for what we're trying to do in the postseason. So I think they're going to come back and really start to ratchet it up a little bit. And I stand by it. I really do think this team is historically special, and I see them win another championship come June.
Can I ask you one more question then?
Yeah.
This is one I've been thinking about that I wanted to talk with Jimmy on the pod eventually. They win back-to-back. Where does Tatum and Brown stand on the pedestal of like Celtics greats?
What's funny? I was talking about this, and you guys mentioned Rich Keefe earlier. Him and I were talking about this the other day. If you're looking at the Celtics team now, you have Hall of Fame cases for, assuming they win another one, Jason Tatum. I think Jason Tatum gets in regardless. Al Horford probably gets in regardless. Jaylen Brown and Drew Holiday. You have four players that are already on a Hall of Fame trajectory. And obviously Derek White still has some time. Kristaps still has some time. So a championship like this, if they go to 3 finals in 4 years and win 2 of them, it solidifies them as one of the best duos. And just it's unfortunate that like the overall winning, it's always just going to come down to rings, but like just the overall winning and what the state this team was in. And I know Isaiah did a great job bridging the gap, but the state this team was in when they got here, and for them to just have this model of consistency every year you were going to the Eastern Conference Finals, I think is really underappreciated. And, teams would kill for that, to have their team playing in the conference finals every single year. And that's just become the norm here, to a point where if they don't make the finals, it's a catastrophe. And they're still so young, 28 years old for Jaylen Brown, 26 for Jason Tatum. Like, these guys are just entering their prime now. And I know the team's going to look a little bit different next year or the year after, just with the financial makeup of it. But appreciate this team and appreciate that duo, because Danny Ainge got it right, and everything that they envisioned is really starting to come true. And you're watching history. That's just the best way to put it.
For sure. Well-run machine, all the top to bottom, players, management, everything, ownership. Hopefully that continues. Justin, thank you so much, man. So glad to have another guy from the South Shore jump on the pod. And, hopefully you get over to Poopsie sometime, get some of that pizza over there as well.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks,
All right, take care.
Have a good day.
All right.
All right.